Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar with UCLA and Upenn Law Schools. Today, we are joined by Nicole Van Zyl. I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the Assistant Director of Graduate Studies at the UCLA School of Law, and Elise Kramer, who is the Assistant Dean of Graduate Programs at Upenn Law School. Welcome, Nicole and Elise. If you would like to give a brief description about your roles and what you do at your respective universities, please. Elise, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. So my name's Elise Kramer. I'm the Assistant Dean of Graduate Programs. I've had the real pleasure and honor of working with LLMs for the past 18 years. I myself am a JD graduate of University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, and I'm really very grateful that folks have tuned in, and I'm excited to share a little bit about LLM programs in the US and answer your questions.
And I'm Nicole Gonzale. I'm the Assistant Director of Graduate Studies at UCLA School of Law. I'm originally from South Africa, where I did my first master's degree after completing my LLB, and then I went on to do the LLM at UCLA. So I'm an alumni of the program. I finished in 2019, along with meeting prospective students and helping move through the application process. I do a lot of course counseling and academic support when our students arrive at UCLA. So I get to kind of start at the beginning of the process and go all the way through to the end with everyone who joins us.
That's perfect.
And I'll just add, I'm also lucky enough to not only be involved with the whole application process, but we're also involved in student services such as course counseling, which is great to have the opportunity to spend time and help support students while they're here during their LLM. Thanks.
So to get it started briefly, would you like to explain what the legal education system in the US is like and what the difference between a JD and LLM would be? Nicole, do you want to take this?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so in the United States, in order to study law, you have to first complete an undergraduate degree. So everyone who joins the JD program in the United States has already completed an undergrad, perhaps in the humanities and the sciences, and then they go on to do the Juris Doctor. So in all cases for US students, they are graduate students. Whereas those of us from a more traditional English background, we're used to doing a 3 to 5 year LLB and as an undergrad, and then moving on to an LLM as a master's degree. So when you enter into legal education in the United States, it's a little bit disorienting at first because you're used to, in your home context, going from LLB and then sitting on top when you get to the LLM level. Whereas legal education in the United States, you're mixed in with the JDs. Everyone in the law school is a graduate student, actually. So you may actually wind up having classes alongside JD students who are getting their first degree in law while you are becoming a master in law. So it's a different way to think about it. But the focus of legal education in the United States, because it is a graduate degree, those students are entrusted with more faith and responsibility. So the tenor of legal education is really practical. And that's what's amazing about studying in the United States versus, say, like when I did my LLM in South Africa, or the kinds of programs you'd see in other Commonwealth countries that don't have this mixing of the like JD and LLM that you see in the US. Is it becomes very academic and hierarchical, and you learn great things, but it's not as practice focused. So being integrated with this practical legal education, you get to do live client work, you get to do like externships, and even in your doctrinal law classes, the focus is really on engagement and practical use of the law. So it's a completely different way of approaching legal education that is so much more engaging compared to what we're used to from the LLB, where you kind of show up to class, You take extensive notes on what the professor's saying. Then you go home and you review those notes, or maybe sometimes you just read the cases or you just read the textbook. US legal education is so hands-on. So from day one, you have to be on top of your readings. You're engaging with your professors. You're flexing those legal muscles every day in the classroom instead of waiting until your finals.
So for following on that, do you notice students having like difficult with like or in a way an identity crisis or difficulty, settling in, considering you mentioned that people coming in from different backgrounds for the same program? Have you noticed a little bit of a difficulty in adjustment?
Mm-hmm. Personally, no. The LLM programs both of our programs are large and predominantly international. So you're arriving for orientation as part of a large international cohort, and everyone is coming into this new space together. And that newness, that common experience of everyone experiencing this new world together, creates amazing support and community. And once you enter the law school, the JDs are so used to like having LLMs every year. They're so excited, like who's going to be our LLMs this year? So yes, there's absolutely homesickness because the United States is a completely different context. But I've always seen people adapt really quickly because their cohort becomes an amazing support system for them from day one.
That makes sense. So, why get an LLM from the US compared to any other country or say the UK?
Yeah. So that I was stressing, it's very practical. So your legal skills go from I would say like maybe a 60% after an LLB education to like 170,000% because of the practical focus of legal education. Clearly, they don't teach us math. So my use of numbers is always hyperbolic. But that practice focused education makes you an incredible lawyer. So there's that. The up level in skills is incredible. And it makes you jurisdictionally bilingual. And that's a really beneficial thing in this modern day and age and globalizing legal education or legal practice, where so much of what's happening is happening in a multinational context. And to be jurisdictionally bilingual is really helpful no matter where you practice law. There's that. And then finally, the network that you leave with, a network of people, your LLM classmates, your JD classmates. From my own experience and those of all the alumni that I work with, is an incredible support system throughout your career. So it's not just day one of the program. Being plugged into a US legal network is very beneficial for all practice in any area of the world.
What kind of job opportunities can I look forward to after completing an LLM? Would you like to take this, Elise?
Sure, sure. So I would say, when you look for an LLM program, you want to go to one that has a good career office, like ours or UCLA, where you have folks who are focused on supporting you with your job search. So it kind of depends. Like, if you want to get a really great job back in India or another jurisdiction, your LLM's going to be terrific. And, different programs that, are really going to support that. If you want to work in the US long term, you should very strongly consider getting a JD. An LLM is not really the best pathway to permanent employment in the US. There are a variety of institutional sort of blocks to that. First of all, of course, even if you get to the JD, you do have visa issues, which can be a challenge. and also just the way that legal education and law firm or legal employment in the U.S. works is it's very focused on hiring JDs. They have traditionally undervalued the experience of LLMs. Even folks who have a lot of experience back home and go to very top law schools struggle for permanent employment. However, there is a program called OPT, which means you're able to stay for 1 year, and often that's a little bit less challenging, but not all students who want to stay and work in the U.S. on their OPT are able to do that. That is also challenging. So you want to make sure that you have a really great support from your law school, although they're just going to be able to give you work on your skills but it's really going to be up to you to do the work, the networking, the applications to get that job.
Another one is, do I need to have a 4-year undergraduate degree in order to get enrolled in the JD program, or a 3-year degree would work specifically in Ivy League schools?
I you know what, I would imagine you need a 4-year degree, but I actually don't know that for sure. I'm not as familiar with our JD admissions office. I think, and it may vary school to school, so you would want to ask that particular school that you're applying to what their prerequisites are.
Okay, so check in with each school depending on their prerequisites. Okay, perfect.
A lot of us don't cross paths or commingle. So we're LLM admissions offices, and both of our schools have a separate office for JD admissions. And so like a lot of those questions, we just, it doesn't feature in our day-to-day.
That's interesting.
And maybe we could segue a little bit to the application process. So actually for both JD and LLM applications in the US, you're going to use something called LSAC, Law School Admissions Council. It's a nonprofit, and it's a centralized way of applying to law schools. For JD programs, you'll apply through there. For almost every JD program, you're going to need to take the LSAT, and they'll have specific instructions. For today, I'm going to focus a little bit more on how the application process works for the LLM programs. And each school can be a little different, but pretty much most schools are going to use LSAC. And what you can do is you can sign on to LSAC and for free and set up an account. And it's a great way to peruse schools. All the schools will have profiles on there, and you can kind of go through and sort and look at different things. And then, once you're ready to apply, in there you'll see the application process for different places. For example, our deadline's a little different than UCLA's deadline. We have an early deadline of November 15th, and then our regular deadline is December 15th. There's not a huge difference between applying one or the other. It just depends when you're going to hear. And then what you're going to do is you're going to apply, you're going to do something called the e-app, which is like the electronic application. Each school, will set that up. It'll have a series of questions you answer electronically. Usually it'll also ask you to upload your CV or your resume and a personal statement. And we'll talk in a few minutes like tips around that. So you'll submit that, and then separately, and what really makes LSAC useful to you and to the schools is that it's a way to kind of organize your documents. So you will submit through LSAC all your transcripts from your undergraduate, graduate, exchange programs, and they are going to verify those and kind of put them together in a bundle and send them to each of the various schools. That's also where your letters of recommendation are going to go. And also, depending from India, schools vary whether they require TOEFL or IELTS or whether you can get an English language waiver. So you'll look on the instructions for each one, and then you'll do that. And just keep in mind that if it can take a little while for the CAS report to be assembled. So you want to think sort of ahead, because it can take 4 to 6 weeks from the time that you get your documents to LSAC to when they get it in sort of in a bundle and then send it off to the schools. But that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how applications work in the U.S. and at both of our schools. A few schools are a little different, but that's going to be generally how it's going to work, especially with sort of the top schools.
Yeah, and off of that, I'll speak briefly about the personal statement. Just FYI, UCLA's application deadline is February 1st every year. Applications open for us on September 1st. So this coming Monday, Tuesday, I think, Sunday. Ooh, confusing. And when it comes to personal statements, it is one of the most useful tools in your arsenal when applying to a school. You want to check every school that you're applying to if they have any guidance or instructions, what they're looking for in their personal statement, and that'll usually be on their application page. But it's 3 pages in which you get to write and demonstrate who you are, what your legal journey has been, so what's brought you into law, what's brought you to this moment in your life that you want to study graduate education. And you're doing 2 major things in that piece of writing. You are showing why you're exceptional, why you're a good fit for whatever school you're interested in, what it is that you're going to bring to the classroom, and also why the school is a good fit for you. So you have to do a lot of research on each of the schools you want to go to. You can't write one personal statement and use that for all your applications, because every school is going to want to know that you have considered their program, you know what's on offer in their law school, what kind of opportunities we have available, and that you've properly taken that into account. So that's something we want to see reflected in your personal statement. So it's that double-sided idea of what you're bringing to the school and what the school's going to offer you. That's really what we want to see in that personal statement. And you want to focus really strongly on the quality of your writing, because that is something that can set you apart. The legal profession is primarily a language-based profession. There's a lot of writing. And so this is something that, I mean, we won't speak too much in depth about it, but one of these moments where it might seem convenient to use AI as you prepare your application materials. The problem with the use of something like ChatGPT is those large language models are based on an aggregate of human communication and language. Anything that comes out of those models is the most average writing possible. And it is so much more difficult to turn something average into something exceptional than it is to start from scratch and have the scaffolding be coming from your mind, your understanding, and then you can polish that so much more effectively than if you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to write me a good personal statement. It'll be the most average thing possible. And bearing in mind that admissions officers are reading thousands of these things. So you start to see patterns. And even if we can't say like, oh yeah, this was definitely written by AI, it's going to be like, oh, well, this is so average. It's so generic of everything I've read before. And then put your application aside. So that's mostly what I wanted to say about personal statements. It really is your chance to demonstrate your excellence, your quality of writing, your argumentative skills, even because you're making an argument for yourself to be admitted to a program.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I thought, Nicole, your words of wisdom on that were just spot on. But I think it's 2 things. A great example of looking at the directions. Our personal statement is supposed to be 2 pages, not 3. So it's going to be different school to school. And I think, you can really, I've been doing this a long time, and you can kind of tell when something's genuine and something's kind of AI, or, some people will sort of go to some sort of service. Write something that's genuine. That's really what you think. And one thing I see again and again from India and from some other countries is people ignore the page limit, and they will do many pages thinking that more is more. And like, okay, great, I'm doing this 5-page personal statement even though it says 2 pages because I have so much to say. and I think, to the contrary, that it shows that you didn't follow directions and that you didn't use the best professional judgment. If something, when goes from 2 to 3 pages by, when it gets put on the PDF, it's a teeny bit off, or I've also seen like, okay, let's do 2 pages and we'll use like 9-point fonts and no margins. Just be professional, use your judgment, follow the instructions, be genuine about what it is why you want to get the degree, why UCLA or Penn Law is the right fit for you. And you can tell, you can include a personal or professional story. There's all, it's not like there's one formula to doing it. Just make sure it's well written, professional, thoughtful.
So I'm seeing the details can make a lot of difference in the way that you evaluate the personal statements that come in.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So I was saying that from what I'm getting from what you two said is that even the smallest of details make a lot of difference in the way that you evaluate the personal statements. Smallest thing from the page numbers to researching the university enough, putting in their own thoughts and goals in rather than just using a very generic online version of what they should be writing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I would rephrase it. I wouldn't say it's the smallest of things. It's sort of, look, if there's like a very small error in it, that happens. To me, it's sort of the bigger picture. Has this person put thought in? Is this professionally written? Did they follow instructions? Sort of. I think, like, I wouldn't want someone to get too caught up in the minutia. Instead, are you thinking sort of big picture? I don't know. Well, what's your thought, Nicole?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Instructions are really important, especially when it comes to page limits. America's very strict on certain things and very lenient on other things. So it's something you kind of get used to. Page limits, very important, very important. The format of your personal statement, not very important. So there you have a lot of freedom, a lot of creativity on how you're going to present yourself and your relationship to the school you're applying to. There's no like A, B, C, D, E, F questions that you have to answer, but you have to do it within 2 pages. And don't annoy the person who's reading your application, to Elisa's point of like, don't make the font really small. Like, there's something to be said about being able to say things in brief. It's a really valuable skill. And if we give you like a 2 or a 3-page limit and you exceed that, we're going to be worried about your ability to follow instructions assigned by your professor and to communicate succinctly in a legal manner.
And although this is not an example of being succinct, one more thing I would say is, and I see this mistake a lot, that people feel like the personal statement is basically just an expansion of your CV. So if you have put information somewhere else in the application, like in your CV or in response to some of the questions in the e-app, you don't need to put them again in the personal statement. That's a short amount of space. Use that to focus on maybe, it's not that you can't maybe talk about one thing then in your CV that was very meaningful, but a little just like line by line description of your accomplishments that is in your CV is just not a good use of that limited space that you have.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Applications, but let's just get to a few questions that the attendees have asked. One is, how important is work experience as a criteria for admissions? I have a 1 year of work experience now, but will have more than 2 by the time I join for LLM in August 2025. Would that be considered a 2-year work experience for evaluation process?
I can respond a little bit. The way we think about experience is how much experience you would have had by the time you start, but it's not like an exact thing. We appreciate experience. It's valuable. About 80% of our class has some significant work experience, but it's not a requirement. I think if you have exceptionally strong academics, if you've shown a lot of leadership and maturity that comes across in your letters of recommendation and perhaps your personal statement, you may be a strong candidate even if you don't have experience. Whereas you could have like 10 years of experience, but your experience is not that impressive, you know, and you don't come across that well. It's not like an exact numbers thing. You know, mostly experience is going to enhance your application. And I think for many people, although it's a personal thing, more experience often allows you to get more out of the LLM. Nicole, but I'd be curious what Nicole thinks.
Yeah, I think our program isn't as strongly practitioner based. I would say maybe about 50 or 60% of the students coming have work experience, and there are a large number who are coming straight out of their first law degree. And a lot of what Elise was saying will be true for our class as well. When we're looking at an applicant, we're looking at them holistically. So it's not possible to say, these are the grades we need. If all you have are grades, your grades better be great. But if you were involved in student leadership, governance, you have publications, those are all things that we're going to look at, and we're going to see like, okay, who are you? What have you done? What is this journey that you've been on? And so everything you've done up until the point you apply is what we're going to consider. So saying like 1 year of work experience versus 2 years of work experience, it makes little or no difference unless those years are different kinds of work experience. If you shift from, say, working in an NGO to working in a private setting, then that's going to be part of your legal story, who you are, why you're coming to us, what's changed. But that legal experience, I don't think it's as, like Elise was saying, people get more out of the program if they have the work experience. I have a different opinion. I think the program is really helpful, even if you don't have work experience. I went in without having worked a day as a lawyer in my life. And what it did for me, all that practical legal education, was kind of helped me figure out that I'm like, oh, perhaps I'd like to be an academic. And US law schools are really strong on that academic writing and engagement as well. So I was able to explore both pathways. So whoever you are, we're going to look at everything in your application. So if you are a really engaged student leader or involved in your community, or you've done internships, that's going to add more information to what we look at. If all you have is a university transcript, that's all we can look at. So that's kind of the balance. Neither is preferred, but you must think of like everything you've done in your legal career is going to be relevant to your to like how law schools consider you.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
and I would just say that different schools sort of weigh experience differently. Like for some schools, you know, they're going to really want people with experience, and the applicant without experience is going to be the exception. Whereas some schools, you know, like UCLA is, you know, is seeing that, and I think Nicole makes a really good point that for some people, coming right away is a really good opportunity to kind of figure out what they want to do and what the next step is. So it's not, I didn't mean to be overly broad. I think she had really good advice.
that's great. Thank you. And another student is asking if, so they're currently a third year undergrad pursuing a major in nutrition and health education, and they want to study law, particularly a JD. Would they be eligible to apply coming from a completely different domain?
We don't know.
Yeah, probably. I would say actually,
Not definitively.
it might vary. Yeah, it might vary a degree to. I'll say this because I'm someone who has a JD from the U.S. and my undergraduate degree was art. So most people who go to law school don't study law undergraduate. It's not really prestigious, colleges and universities in the U.S. do not have law as an undergraduate major. People might do political science or history or art, or my husband did like religious studies and then went to law school. So I think, a first law degree is going to be a requirement for an LLM program, but it may not be a requirement for a JD program in the U.S. You want to check on the school, but depending in the U.S. No, like I don't, people usually the incoming JD class has like 80 different majors.
Mm.
That's interesting. So in terms of career support and the realities of the US market, post completing your degree, can you give some insights into that?
Well, I talked a little bit about that already. Nicole, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of it. There are generally two kinds of students. There are students who are really invested in a particular area of law, and there are students who are really invested in working in the US. And within our program, I've seen both kinds of students succeed, and I've seen both kinds of students not succeed. You have to bear in mind that post OPT, so OPT is a lot easier to secure because your visa status is an extension of your F1. So technically, the person under whose auspices you remain in the US is your university. Once you've complete your OPT and you have to move to an H-1B visa, it's based on a lottery system, and 80% of applications that go through that lottery system are denied. So even if you find an employer who loves you, you go through the OPT with them, they want to keep you, they apply for your H-1B, you're up against the lottery, and then you just don't know. So that's something that's very serious that you need to take into consideration if you are wanting to work in the US, is that is going to be a real barrier. When I see students who are eager to remain in the US for a year, they find their OPT, usually they're really flexible about what kind of work they do. So they will become, a lot of larger firms will have kind of people who do legal research. So you're not within the legal practice side of the firm, but you're doing legal research that supports the firm. People may work as paralegals. People may leave their area of expertise to work in a different area. So like, for example, immigration is a very porous field in Los Angeles, but it might not be in, oh my gosh, my American geography is about to embarrass me. The University of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
It's in Philadelphia, right?
Philadelphia is in Pennsylvania, yeah.
Okay, so the city is Philadelphia. Woo! So there's that like major issue that you have to be realistic about. But from city to city, there may be different legal industries that are really porous. They have a great need for people who are legally bilingual. Like that's why immigration is such a big hirer we see in LLMs, because you're working with immigrant populations, and to have an immigrant lawyer work with immigrant populations is really helpful, as an example. But it's not guaranteed.
And I would add to that, it varies a lot with the U.S. economy and what's going on in your home country. So when the economy in the U.S. at legal firms is booming, they kind of make room for LLMs in a way they don't when the legal there's a crunch in the legal services industry. And also it can vary a lot. If there's a lot of business going on in your home country, between the U.S., or law firms are trying to get in, then there might be interest. And it should be interesting. We started this conversation about what's going on in India and whether or not, as that develops, as there may be more opportunities for international practice in India, if that might be helpful, because you'll see in other countries, someone will work at maybe a U.S. or British firm in, let's say, somewhere in Europe, and they're able to spend a year or two in the U.S. office, and that movement around with the international firms. So I guess it's a big wait and see to see how that all plays out in India.
That's interesting. So that, for the previous
Sorry, your mic's a bit inconsistent.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, in terms of the passed out students that you have seen before, do you notice a lot of people being able to stay back and work in the US or more going back to their home countries?
The
Oh, more
majority,
going back to their home countries.
Yeah.
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 Okay. And are there any scholarships available when they apply to an LLM program?
Yeah, why don't I start with that one? So it's going to vary a lot school to school. So the application process is very sort of standardized or much more standardized, and different schools are going to do it very differently. And some schools, mostly they're going to be merit based, but some schools will consider your financial aid. And I'll say something about our program and about thinking about financing you. For us, we do have merit scholarships. But it's a limited number of students, a little amount. But all you have to do is check a box on our application. That's it. Like, you don't have to do anything else. But students are really well advised as they are thinking about applying to schools to really think about how they're going to finance their LLM year. It's, for better or for worse, it's very expensive in the US compared to India. The good news is you get tremendous amount of support, the facilities, the faculty. It's like that's part of what's great about it, but it's expensive. So you want to start looking for home scholarships, looking into loans, looking into, what resources the law school that you're applying to, and that may play a role in where you decide to go depending on what kind of scholarship offers you get. In my experience, most students, it's some sort of combination of maybe some aid from the school, maybe a loan, maybe some family money. One of the advantages of having work experience is you can sometimes have saved up, or in some cases, I haven't seen this as much in India as other countries, that the law firm will either provide a loan or some sort of funding to support the LLM. So,
Yeah.
Nicole?
Yeah, so similar to UPenn, we have a standardized scholarship, the Dean's Tuition Fund. It is predominantly merit-based. We do take financial need into consideration when we make those determinations. It's one box that you tick when you fill out your e-application through LSAC. And it is a limited number. About 20% of our students will get an award under that. And because we have a limited pool of funding, we want to consider helping students as much as we can. So the amount we offer may vary from a couple $1,000s. The max usually we're able to give is 50% of the tuition amount. We do have 2 subject matter specific full tuition grants. One is in critical race studies and the other one is in health and human rights. That is not a full ride. So I think something like a full ride at a US law school, you're going to be hard pressed to find that. So while we can give a full tuition grant for exceptional candidates who have a background either in critical race studies or health and human rights, we don't then have additional funding for living expenses. So even a candidate coming on one of those tuition grants is going to need to find living expenses. So as much like as you're thinking about this process of applying to schools in the US, you need to be considering outside funding from the beginning, like Elise said.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, we do have a human rights scholarship, but it's only about 50% of tuition. And for that, there's a separate essay on the application.
Okay. So we have a question. Someone who did one semester of the 10 semesters of their LLB program, they did it as an exchange student. So would they need the transcripts from the other university along with this one, or just the main?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Every transcript of every degree you've done that's on your application will need to appear.
Yeah, post high school.
Yeah, post high
Okay.
school. So including semesters abroad, it'll need to come from the issuing institution.
Yeah. And I have to say, as a reviewer, of, I don't know, 20,000 applications over the, I find the performance or how people do in study abroad can be really helpful. It gives us a little window into how someone is able to manage studying in a different place. This is, if you're coming to another country to study here, and it is helpful to know how well you did in back in India, but it's also helpful to know, how did this person do when they had to study in a different system or maybe in a different language.
Right. So it gives you a better idea of how maybe some idea of how they will be able to perform at your university as well. Right. Okay. Another question that we have is, after doing an LLM, can they practice in New York after giving the bar exam? Or what are the challenges and what are the chances to be able to get in?
I can talk about the New York bar for a second, and Nicole, maybe you can talk about California if people are interested. So, in the U.S., you take a bar exam state by state, and there are a few states that allow foreign trained attorneys to sit for a bar. In New York, most students from India would be able to sit for the New York bar if they do an LLM that covers certain classes, which both of our programs, you can do that. So then you can sit for it, and a lot of people do. About half our students sit for the New York bar, and then a handful maybe for California and others. But most of them go back, after the New York bar exam and getting admitted is helpful back home. Of course, if you wanted to stay in New York long term to practice, you would need the bar exam, but the bar exam it's a prerequisite to permanent practice in New York. It's not a guaranteed pathway to practice in New York.
Yeah. And things to be aware of specifically with the New York bar exam is that it's not just a bar exam. In order to be able to practice in the state of New York, you need to pass the bar exam, you need 50 hours of community service, and there's a legal practice requirement. So there's certain ways you can sometimes get that practice requirement through the LLM. It's very difficult, but you need to have worked continuously with one employer for a minimum of 6 months to satisfy that practice requirement. So you can either have done it before the bar or after the bar. So actually getting admitted as an attorney to practice in New York is really, there's so many additional hurdles that you have to pass. Some of them you may be able to complete during the LLM. It's difficult to hit every point. California, very different. So while New York is challenging to get admitted to practice, they are on the UBE, so they have reciprocity agreements with other states. So you could get a really good grade in the New York bar and potentially then practice in Texas, for example.
I was going to say the reciprocity is more limited for LLMs than it is for JDs, but Texas, like it's not like every state, but anyway,
not every state, and there's still going to be things like with that reciprocity, you still need the practice requirement to be admitted to the bar in Texas. So it's still not easy. In comparison to California, which has absolutely no reciprocity with any other state, but it is also the easiest state in terms of requirements once you pass the bar exam to become barred. So in California, you pass the bar exam, you do your moral character and fitness, which you have to do in every state, and then you can be admitted to practice. So there's no other extra community service or this or that. And on top of that, this year, California no longer requires bar-tested subjects in your LLM. So you have to do PR, which is professional responsibility, and that's it. And the rest of your curriculum is, you can do with it what you want. Whereas for New York, you have to do professional responsibility, legal analysis and writing. You need a constitutional law subject. And then you need two other.
So what I would say about our program, about one of the advantages of Penn, is we're probably the best school, ironically, because we're not in New York. We're the best school if you want to sit for the New York bar, because we have a whole summer preterm program, and you get rid of a bunch of the requirements during the preterm. The preterm is really not specifically designed for that. It's to make sure our students are, this year is 5 weeks and 5 credits, foundations in U.S. law, legal research and writing, so that you're really able academically, socially. We do all sorts of fun things. I'm going to a final luncheon today after their exam. to kind of get you settled. And there's really no other program that does this as long. And so you meet a lot of the requirements. Then we have a situation where we really make it very easy to do the 50 hours of pro bono. We have someone in that office who's focused on that. We actually have a pathway one situation that most schools can't do because we have so much, such a large program. But I think the takeaway is if you want to sit for the New York bar or like the California bar, you don't have to go to law school in those states, but you want to look, if that's very important to you, you want to look at how the law school handles that. Like, how do they support you? So if you want to sit for the New York bar, happen to be a very particularly good school to do that, even though we're in Philadelphia. More of our JDs take the New York bar than take the Pennsylvania bar.
Mhm.
Okay. And a follow-up on the requirements, like you mentioned, they need to have practiced. Does the practice have to be in the US or can it just be any prior practice in general?
Yeah.
But 6 months and continuous.
Right.
So
Yeah, or actually, there are three pathways that potentially LLM students can be eligible. It's not eligible to sit, but to be able to do it. There's pathway one, which is pretty challenging, but we actually can do that. I think we're one of the only law schools that is really set up to do that. But I kind of discourage students from doing that because there's other ways to satisfy it, and it kind of controls your curriculum too much. It doesn't allow you to take the classes you wanted to. The second way is most of our students satisfy it because they already have practice. They've practiced law. You don't have to do it in the US. They have enough practice experience that they meet another pathway. The final one is to be supervised for 6 months, and that can happen in the U.S. or elsewhere, and it can happen after your degree. So it's not you take the bar, and then at some point, like let's say you're here for an OPT, you could do it there. You go back home, you could do it there. There's a lot of ways to do it, but it's that's how we see it.
Yeah, I think if you could just both of you briefly, mention what is unique about each of your law schools and what students could get out of your universities. Nicole,
Nicole, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. So the UCLA Law LLM program I mentioned earlier, you're completely integrated with the JD students. So every class that they can take at an advanced level, you can take, which means you have over 200 advanced level courses to choose from, which honestly, this year I'm seeing a lot of students battling with an abundance of choice. And wanting to take so many units. And I'm like, please don't spend your whole life in the library. You're in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is an incredible city. Please experience that as well. Within the LLM program, we have a lot of specializations that you could potentially pursue. I'm forgetting the number now because we've added some new ones. So really popular ones are the business law specialization. Really popular this year is the media, entertainment, technology, and sports law specialization, which is naturally a fantastic thing to pursue in Los Angeles. We just added a law and technology specialization, which we're really excited about. And then there are other more niche areas. Critical race studies is one of the most unique specializations in the US. We have environmental law, human rights, public interest law, international comparative law. So there are a lot of specializations, but we also offer the general LLM. So if you come in and you choose to pursue the general LLM, you have absolute freedom over your course selection from those 200 classes. The only mandatory class happens in orientation. So by the time the semester begins, you are able to run amok amongst all the amazing educational opportunities at UCLA. What I will say, to me, like, it's an amazing institution. The education is so fantastic. But the thing that most surprised me about UCLA and made it special to me and made me want to return to it is the nature of community and people that choose to come to UCLA. It's a large public institution. It's very public service minded. It's a community of people that are really invested in justice and looking after each other and their classmates. And so what surprised me more than anything was how wonderful the people I studied with, my lecturers, my classmates. That to me was a major surprise because my undergraduate experience, I thought all lawyers were terrible, horrible people. And UCLA really changed that for me. So that I think is what makes the difference is it's a real quality of life program. Every day is something special, something to be cherished. And that's why I love the school and the program so much.
So before I say a few things about Penn Carey Law's program is just thinking about programs, a lot of it's about fit. Like there are so many terrific programs in the U.S. And you really and what might be the right program for one person might be not the right program for another person. So really think about it. So now I'll talk about Penn Carey Law. I think there are a few things that make our program really stand out. The quality of the education is really high. Like UCLA and other T14 schools, we're going to have top faculty. I'd say UPenn is the only Ivy League school where all 11 sister schools are on the same campus and very close to each other. So it's a particularly interdisciplinary school. So you can take a class at another school, people take classes here. You're going to kind of have an interdisciplinary experience whether you want to or not, because that's just the way things are. We don't see the law in isolation. And I think the way that LLMs engage in that most is about half the class will do a certificate at Wharton, the Wharton Business and Law Certificate, which you can do alongside the LLM program. And I think, that actually, it's not going to guarantee you a job in the U.S., but Wharton seems to be very highly valued by employers, and it's a very practical opportunity for lawyers to learn business skills, business communication. And I mentioned our preterm program, which I think is really great. I don't know how some of the programs have these incredibly short orientation programs. I don't kind of know how that happens. And like UCLA, our JDs are mixed in. They're doing the clubs, they're doing the classes alongside the other students. We really focus on the general LLM, but we do have an IP concentration you can do. We also have a energy, security, and human rights concentration. You don't have to kind of do it in advanced. It's just selecting certain classes. We do have the option to do a thesis if you would like. And I think, like UCLA, we're a very collegial community. We are collegial, I think, particularly with the LLMs because of the preterm, so they really get to know each other well, and then they mix in with the JD. And our law school is just a pretty small law school. The LLM program is usually about 120 students. We sort of, more people said yes than we expected. So our class is 135 from, I think, 33 countries this year. And the law school itself, the JD program's pretty small. We're all in one sort of interconnected building. So that allows for like a really collegial community within a very large university. So you kind of have the best of both worlds. And then I'll just say something about Philadelphia, because maybe, we're not featured in films quite as often as UCLA. Philadelphia is actually, by U.S. standards, quite a large city. It's the 6th largest city in the U.S. We're sort of a little bit halfway between New York and D.C., about a little over an hour train ride to New York. The university is one side of the river, Schuylkill River, and then the center city. Students can kind of live in either. It's a very easy, very walkable, very kind of charming city of neighborhoods. And one thing you might want to think about as you're thinking about costs is the cost of living in Philadelphia is amongst the lowest of any major city, which is mainly because we have a lot of housing, so there's not quite the crunch that there is that drives up some of the costs of the LLM in securing housing. So, I think it's a great program. I think getting an LLM in the U.S. is a really great opportunity, and we have a lot of really wonderful law schools here with terrific LLM programs, and you just need to kind of sort through and think about what's important to you and what makes the most sense. So that's
Thank you. So in closing, any advice that you would like to give to students that are considering applying for an LLM program, or just generally thinking about going to law school?
Well, I think we've been heavy on the advice. Like, please choose a program that's or programs that are going to be a good fit for you, and tailor your application to that school, because that really matters. It makes a difference. It's how you stand out, is knowing both yourself really deeply and the schools you're applying to. So other than that, that's
I'm
kind
going to give 2 quick application tips. When it comes to letters of recommendation, pick someone who knows you well over someone who is well known. We see time and again someone who thinks they know someone famous, or it's the managing partner of the firm or the dean of the law school writes a letter. It's very generic because the person doesn't really know you, whereas maybe your direct supervisor or an assistant professor really knows you and can really write a letter of recommendation that is useful. So, who not who's well known. And secondly, on the CV, I think it can be helpful to be a little focused on. It's not quantity over quality. An 8-page CV, unless you're out like 20 years, kind of doesn't make sense. Focus on the things where you've had a significant role, where you've done leadership. Light participation in something doesn't necessarily merit being on your CV. So I think those are 2 sort of application tips, I would say. But we hope you'll consider an LLM program in the U.S.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this today, Nicole and Elise. All of your expertise and experience has really been helpful for us, given us a lot of insights into the law programs in general in the US. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks for hosting us, inviting us, giving us the opportunity to talk to potential students.
Thank you.
Yeah.